Hi, Yanis, and welcome back to a Yin Yoga podcast. I have a guest interview for you today, which I'm super excited about. A colleague and school chum of mine. We'll hear more about that once we get started. But today's topic is going to be on words, the power of the words that we choose to use in our yoga classes. And I can't wait to dive right in. But before we do, just very quickly, a podcast review. This is a 5-star from MJ Healy 282. I know who you are. Hello, Matthew. I first encountered Nick on the MBOM podcast, which is a yoga business podcast, where she talked about her journey to yoga and how she approaches marketing for her business. Her journey was similar, almost identical to mine. She's a breath of fresh air in a milieu that seems, for better or worse, saturated with yoga podcasts that can be overly technical at times. Thank you, Matthew. All right, my friends. Just a reminder as well that although I have the soul of a mermaid, I also have the mouth of a sailor. So you can expect some adult language. So please take that into consideration and grab yourself some headphones now. So my guest today is Leta Lavigne.
Yeah, looking forward to chat.
So my guest today is Leta Lavigne, and I'll just quickly give you a little heads up about her bio. Leta Lavigne, who is a registered 500 and a continuing education provider, is actually a Seattle native and the founder of Yoga Rocks Studios in Finland. As a longtime student of Yin Yoga founder Paul Grilly, Lita embraces the functional approach to teaching. She crafts intuitive yin and yin yang classes, enriched with a somatic dimension, embracing yoga as both the anchor and the instrument of flow. Oh, beautiful. And of course, I will put all of her Instagram and all of that in the bio and her website. So if you want to connect with her on her Instagram to see her reflections on yoga, motherhood, and life as a transplant in the country of rye bread and reindeer. Oh my goodness. Let's try this again. Okay. So Leta Lavigne is a Seattle native and the founder of Yoga Rocks Studios in Finland. As a longtime student of Yin Yoga founder Paul Grilly, Lita embraces the functional approach to teaching. She crafts intuitive yin and yang classes that are enriched with a somatic dimension, embracing yoga as both the anchor and the instrument of flow. You can visit yogarocks.fi to find out about upcoming trainings and events, or connect with her on Instagram at Leta_Lavigne to see her reflections on yoga, motherhood, and life as a transplant in the country of rye bread and reindeer. So that's my friend. And the next time that you hear from me, you will hear from me with Leta. Welcome, Leta.
Do I have to? Hi. Well, hi.
Thanks for coming. Yeah,
Thank you for having me.
You will have to say yes to the recording.
Yes, I agreed.
Gotcha. We are good to go then. Well, first of all, thank you for joining me. What time is it where you are?
It is 7 p.m.
It is always such an exciting idea to connect with my European friends. And then we start trying to do the time change thing. And it's like, oh, crap. How is this going to work out?
Right?
Yeah.
You're in the morning, right?
Yeah. It's about 9 here. Yeah. Yeah. I have a friend who lives half of his life in Thailand and half in Spain. And he's been asking me to be on his podcast. And it's not going to happen until he's back in Spain because Thailand is like, I think 24 hours ahead. So it's like, it would be the middle of the night for me or for him. It's just yeah. So thank you for taking evening time for this. I appreciate that.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
So let's start with, I always like to start with hearing about people's yoga journey. Because I know that myself and other yoga teachers love to hear how other people found yoga. So maybe we'll start with that.
Okay. Well, I flirted with it a little bit when I was at my first year of university. I took an Indian philosophies class, and the sort of ancient instructor of that course did a class in his home that I went to. And I was one of those, annoying students who was there like, hee, like, oh, what's happening. And it took a good while after that before going back. And it was a much different style that I went back to. So some years ago, I was living in Thailand at the time, and I got really into hot yoga, Bikram yoga. That was like my first love, which I know it's crazy, but like I was living in the island of Phuket, and I would drive all the way across the island, this gorgeous, tropical weather, to the air-conditioned mall, and inside the air-conditioned mall to the hot yoga studio.
That is hilarious.
Do the hot yoga practice. Yes, it was, I know, a little
It's
bit
funny
crazy.
to even think about hot yoga in a country as hot as Thailand.
Right?
But then that picture you painted of like out from the heat into the air conditioning, back into the heat, into the air conditioning, back outside. Wow.
Yes. And yeah, that was the practice that I first got into. And for me, it was just such a transformational, tool in my life. It was like a time where I was sort of searching, what am I doing? I didn't have a real job I was working for an international school, but it was not like my career path. I was sort of, in between. So really fell in love with the practice of hot yoga. And then my practice kind of evolved from there. I wasn't practicing for even too long. Really, I practiced a lot, but I wasn't practicing for maybe a year before I decided to go to teacher training. So, 2008, I went to teacher training. I didn't have the intention to teach. I just thought like, oh, I love this thing so much. I want to know more. I want to do more. And so I went to an intensive with Jimmy Barkin in Florida, and I did a first 200-hour teacher training. And it wasn't my plan. I was still living in Thailand working for the school. But then teaching jobs, started to fall in my lap. Everyone was like, can you come and teach at this boxing gym? And can you teach at the dance studio? And so a lot of opportunities started to come up. And then I moved to Finland, and I didn't have a job. And so this was like several years into it. We opened a studio so that I could have work here. And
you moved to Finland because you met a boy, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The typical story. Story. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was 2010. Yeah. And I was really physical. From hot yoga, I got into vinyasa flow. I did some vinyasa flow trainings. That was really like my passion in the practice at first. But I had some issues with my shoulder. Basically, woke up one day and my arm didn't lift up any higher than this. And then it was a long journey back from that. And that's sort of
frozen shoulder.
It was something called Parsonage-Turner syndrome, where basically because of a virus, like I had dengue fever when I was in Thailand. And it triggered something in the immune system where it's like your body is like attacking its own nerves.
Wow.
Yeah. So then when you get overly stressed or whatever, it's too much, you're working out too much. And then, so yeah, I had a few recurrences of that. And then one day it was just like, oh, I went from being like, this is the year of pressing up to handstand to like, oh, I don't raise my arm. And that sort of pushed me towards the yin side. That's when I decided to go to a first training with Paul Greeley. And that led me more to yin and meditation. And of course I can, do this again. But yeah, that was a that was
So you had
a big
done
shift for me.
some yin, I'm guessing, before
I
you just
had
decided to
tried
run off.
yin,
Yeah.
yes, actually in that hot yoga studio in Thailand. I had tried yin. I hated it. I thought it was like torture, basically. For me, it
Yeah.
was torture.
It just wasn't where you were at,
It
right?
was not where I was at that time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
That's actually, I think, pretty common, especially
yeah.
for, and because I'll often when I'm doing this podcast, I'll, because I'm largely talking to a lot of teachers, I'll say, like, if you have those students that are like the vinyasa girls and the hot
Mhm,
girls, it's like you're going to have to speak to some things, because they're going to be like,
mhm.
this sequence is boring. Are we still doing this? Like, you're going to have to, like, you're going to have to make it interesting to them,
Yeah.
with your
It
words.
takes
Yeah.
time. It takes
Yeah.
time. And yeah, I think it's not always the practice for everyone at every point in their life. And
100%.
sort of you have those new students, and I always say, like, that's when you find the little pile of like torn toenails on the
Oh,
floor, like
gross.
you know,
Yes.
it's a true story.
Yeah. They're just fidgeting away.
It's like
Oh
fidgeting
boy.
away. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I
So
think
yeah, I got into yin. I started to study with Paul Greeley, and that's where we met.
yes.
And yeah,
And so you were kind of essentially forced by the shoulder thing to
yeah,
to
it did
spend more
make
time.
a detour
Yeah.
in that direction. I was still teaching everything active, and I still do teach yang forms of yoga. But yeah, over the years, and then also I think just with aging, yin has
Mm-hmm.
become much more of my home
Mm-hmm.
with.
Yeah. I think for those of us that are aging with yoga as teachers, I find too that there's, I don't know, like for me, there was just a point where, like, I don't have poses on my vision board anymore,
Mhm,
like
mhm.
that like center of the room handstand. It's like, actually, I just kind of want to feel good in my body and soothe my nervous system, so I'm not snapping at people when I'm out and about, and that's enough, like,
Absolutely.
that's it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So then you ran away and you studied with Paul, and then you did that repeatedly.
I did that repeatedly. I did that a lot. Yes. I just came back from studying with Paul for the first time since COVID. So yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
have continued on with Paul and Susie, and that has been a really huge influence for me. Of
Yeah.
course, when the first time I went there, it, completely blew up everything that I had just learned and
Yes.
everything that I had been doing for the last couple of years. But it's been a process to continue to integrate all of that functionality. And yeah, so that's been wonderful. I also studied with Tara Judell and Dr. Scott Lyons in the School of Embodied Flow, which is
Nice.
sort of a somatics
I'm not familiar with
infused.
them.
Yeah. Well, Tara Judell is still running that school. She's amazing. Yeah,
Cool.
it's a wonderful school. Hmm.
And so you're incorporating somatics in with your flows.
I think that creeps its way in.
Yeah.
I
You
don't
can't
like
help but,
claim
right?
it, but
Yeah.
yeah, but it
Yeah.
definitely comes in.
Yeah. I remember many years ago when I wasn't teaching yin yet. I was teaching, because I came from the Iyengar camp, and
Mm,
then, discovered Paul's DVD back in the old days when it was on
mhm.
DVD, and then had done a weekend workshop with him. And so I was having this, like, so all these, like, one size fits everybody rules that I learned in Iyengar yoga, or if you can't do this, we just put more props under you till you all look the same.
Mm,
Luckily, I was very blessed that that was only 2 years into my teaching, that
me
that
too.
that I was able to I wasn't like, because I saw some of my younger teachers in that workshop losing their shit,
Mm,
because they're like level bazillion, I don't remember how many levels there are in Iyengar, certified. They've been teaching this for years, and now they're seeing, like, evidence right in front of them in bodies and bones that actually it
right.
isn't. And I just remember the, like, compassion I felt for them, because they were
Mhm.
literally like deer in headlights. And I remember Susie saying to them, if you feel like the yoga mat has been pulled out from underneath you, like just, you don't have to leave tomorrow and go change everything you're teaching. Like, let this information percolate, let it settle, let it, and I remember feeling that way after my first level with Paul. I went home. First of all, I immediately started teaching Tadasana differently, just because of what Paul said based on his body. And I was like, oh, that never occurred to me. But I do remember being in training at one point thinking, I don't know how to cue anything anymore. Like, what am I going to say now? Just stand at the front of your mat, however you want, like I was just like, I was really, struggling. And I do remember a student saying to me, because, I'd come back after a summer away traveling, and I no longer say, bring your feet together at the front of your mat. And I just say, come and stand comfortably. This is mountain pose. Do you feel stable? Do you feel like you are a mountain? Find the stance that's appropriate for you. And I remember a student afterwards saying, you used to teach us that our feet had to be together, and now you're not anymore. And why is that? And I just said, because I learned. And I'm like, when you know better, you do better. I was like, if it's comfortable for you though, and it works for you, you keep bringing your feet together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But it is a bit of a big adjustment, I think.
So yeah, those who are like coming through, I think now are so lucky that they don't have to sort of like dismantle all of that to begin with, to come in with that.
I think there's kind of like a almost half and half now. Like because one of the things I do in my teacher training is, as the anatomy component is, they all have to purchase Paul's Anatomy for Yoga, which is now streaming, not only on DVD. And they have to watch that before, and their first homework assignment is reflection questions on that. Like I have some questions, kind of like a book report, that they have to fill out. And it's really interesting to me to watch how half of them will be like, oh, actually, we learned Paul's DVD in my 200 hour, or this is the way I learned it. And then how the other half are like, okay, so I got some thinking to do. So I think it is starting to hopefully turn, that people are less dogmatic.
I feel like there has been quite a shift in the last, like since I started studying with Paul, at least.
Yeah. It's maybe because there's more of us minions of his out there. There's some more of us saying, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so then how long, well, I mean, you've studied with Paul repeatedly, and I'm guessing you train teachers now as well.
I do, but just here locally in Finland. Well, yeah.
And are you doing like a yin separate, or are you combining like a yin yang trainings together, or do you have them as modules?
I have done both. We just restructured everything. I just restructured everything. So now it's more modular, so that we can do, 200 hours of yin or 200 hours of flow.
Nice.
So they're all modular, but it's small, it's local,
Yeah. But I would imagine that anybody that lives in Finland, if they feel called to, it's not like it's far for them to get to you for a few weeks to take training.
If you're here in the area or even elsewhere in Europe, I think it's definitely doable. Latvia is lovely. Welcome.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not hard to get to, for Europeans anyway. For me, it's a little hard. So that's cool. One of the reasons that, the reason that, other than just to always catch up with old friends and colleagues, which is always great, that I reached out to you is because I saw a graphic that you had created. And it was just posted in the Yin group that we're all in, a Yin Yoga network on Facebook. And I don't even know if it was you that shared it or if somebody else shared it because they had found it helpful. And I think it was called Yin Words. And I remember reading it and thinking, ooh, there's some good ones on here. There's some good words on here, because I do think that especially when you are moving from teaching mostly movement-based forms of yoga into a more still practice, but not as still as and as long held as, say, restorative. Like there's this sort of little niche thing that yin is, and it can be difficult to find the words. Um, and then of course there's the difficulty as a teacher of then finding your own words. But I feel like when we're new teachers, we all parrot our teachers because we don't have our own words yet. You know, we're just repeating what we were taught because we're still in that frame of mind. And then from my experience, now having been teaching since 2004, 20 years. Holy crap, when did that happen? Feels like it's been half of that. Like I'm like, whoa, that's a long time. What I started noticing is, of course, in the beginning, I used my teacher's words. And then when I realized, oh, maybe those aren't so skillful, I used other words that I heard around in the yoga world. But it wasn't until I took my yoga therapy training that I really started like wordsmithing with my own words, where I would be like, even in my yin, which we can talk about in a minute, how I changed some of the verbiage from Paul with permission. Not that I needed his permission, but you know, Paul and I had a good chat about it, about the words and like what was coming up for me. So I'd love to hear a bit more about what was kind of the impetus for create, and was it part of a bigger article?
I created that infographic, and then Yoga Journal had reached out to me to like, can we make a little article about that? So yeah, then it became an article. Yeah.
And so when you created
Yeah.
it, was it for your teachers in training, or what was the kind of like, I think I need to make this thing?
Because of the pressure of trying to be like, all right, now I'm gonna put something on Instagram, to be honest. You know what I mean? It's like, oh my God, every day I feel like all the time I'm like, oh, I gotta produce something on Instagram and make some content now. But I'm horrible at it. I'm so inconsistent. It ends up being like 3 times a year that I post something.
I
But
hope
yeah,
yoga
that was
teachers are
why.
listening to this, because I know there's a lot of people nodding right now going, oh my
Right?
God, the
It's just
pressure of
like,
what to put on Instagram.
it's
Yeah.
just like back there, like, oh, you should post something. But yeah, I'm not very consistent. But I come from a background of loving words. I come from a writing background, or that's what I went to school for. I mean, I was a word nerd. I had a thesaurus, you know, where I literally would
Yes.
be like underlining stuff when I was younger, and I loved to write. When I was in school, that's what I studied, which is why I was in Thailand, like finding myself after
Right.
university, because I studied creative writing, and I was like, okay, now what?
Right.
So, yeah, my original life plan was to be a novelist, and writing and words just something that has always resonated with me. So yeah, it just was something that I kind of collected together. And I do think that, because that thing of like, when in the beginning, you know, what to say, and in the beginning we're sort of just parroting whatever we've heard. I do think it's one of those things, like cueing. You have to start somewhere. And I do think that it's something that can be improved. You know, we can do sort of like top down and bottom up. Like, we can do
Yes.
top down, like we can research, we can brainstorm, we can Google up poems and, you know, gain inspiration for our languaging. We can think about it and analyze it and all of that. But then, like, you don't want to be there reading off a script. Saying something that isn't like coming from your gut, or, you know, isn't authentic to you. So then in the delivery of it, it has to become like, it's a bottom up thing where it's
Yes.
natural for you.
I think That's so good. That top down, bottom up. Because I think when you're a new teacher, it is very much kind of top
Mm,
down, you know, like
mhm.
we're just, this is what my teacher said, you know. Um, a lot of teachers, I wasn't like this because I'm a bit rebellious, but like don't even kind of like question what their teacher says. They just, you
Mm,
know, nope, this is the gospel according to my teacher. Until
yeah.
of course they have some sort of crisis of faith at some point in their teaching and are like, whoa, wait a minute. Either that, you know, they realize that they've learned something new, like I did and like you did with studying with Paul, where we're like, oh,
Mm,
okay, some of my cues maybe not accurate. Or, you know, I know a lot of people out there have studied in depth with the teacher who has then, and those of you who can't see because you're not watching YouTube, have fallen from grace at some point. You know, there's so many
mm,
yoga scandals out there
mm,
that then it's like, oh, okay, now I need to shift and find like my own seat as a teacher.
mm,
Um, it's a clip, and I'll, if I can find it, I'll put it in the episode show notes. But there is actually a clip of Paul saying that on one of the DVD presentations that he did with Pranamaya, and I don't remember if it's from the anatomy one. I think it is, where he talks about that, where there's a point where, like, I'm going to butcher, of course, what he says, but I'll find the video and put the clip in if I can find it. Where he talks about this, like that there's a point where you have to use your own critical thinking and, you know, start to think for yourself and ask questions and not just automatically do what your teachers have done. Um, which is what happened to me the last time that I studied with Paul. Now, I don't like to say the last time because I don't mean like the
mm,
last time. I mean like the last time in the past. I have not yet managed to get together with them in post-COVID times. Um, but when I did my last of my 500 hours, I was also studying yoga therapy at the time. And
mhm.
so, like, having taken my trauma training and my yoga for mental health module, and then mentoring with the trauma training, I was really starting to sit with some of the words that we use in yin and go, ooh, I don't I don't really love that word. Not only sometimes because it didn't feel trauma sensitive to me, and other times it just didn't feel accurate to
Mm,
my own experience. So for example, rebound.
mm,
It doesn't feel like a rebound to me. It doesn't feel like a bounce back. It feels to me, I use the word resonance or linger
mm.
because
Yeah, I love.
it feels slower and more embodied and kind of gradual to me than a rebound, you
Mm,
know? So that one I didn't change because I didn't think it was trauma sensitive. I was just like, this doesn't quite. And so I talked to him about that because, you know, there's always this line I find between not wanting to be a total, you know, blind faith, like I'm not a
mm,
sheep personality, but
mm.
also wanting to still respect and honor the teacher that is giving you,
Right,
right. And so finding the harmony between those two is in my book is tricky. It's not tricky at all with Paul because he's so
right. He's so open. He doesn't
nonplussed and
care.
just doesn't care. He's not attached, right? But I remember sitting down with him and just saying, you know, can I have a couple minutes? And he said, sure. And I just said, you know, I'm noticing since I've been studying yoga therapy that some of
Mm,
these the words that we've been all using in yin circles just aren't working for me, like edge, you know, and
mm,
target area. And just I was like, ooh, you know, some of this language. And I said, they just aren't really working with me. And, you know, I'm wondering how you feel about that, about, you know, re-wordsmithing these things. And he looked at me very matter-of-factly in his way that Paul does and says, well, you should use whatever words work for you and your students, you know, just like,
yeah.
all right, we're done with that, you know, like it was
Yeah.
no big deal to him, right? Whatsoever. Um, so I really think that there is this line between at a certain point in your teaching career where you have all the words from your teachers and then you start to find your own. And
Mm,
from me, they come from my own practice. That's
mm,
how I realized this doesn't feel like a rebound. What does it feel like? What would be the word? And I'd heard someone else call it an echo, and I was like, close, but not quite. And then I was like, it's a resonance for me.
mm.
Um, and so I'm guessing that those words, which we can go over some of them in a little bit,
Sure.
that you wordsmithed were based on like what you felt in your body and what you felt was needed as you were teaching?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we're trying to what we're communicating, obviously, and we're trying to sort of guide that energetic experience, or the energetic curve of the class. We're trying to, set up this space for
Mm-hmm.
experiencing, and to give it a vibe, for lack of a better word, like,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it feels differently if you say, like, all right, change to the other side, versus like, take your time to migrate over to the other side, and you give it a
Mm-hmm.
little time, give it a little space, to deliver it. And I think also because, at least for me, especially here in Finland, like, I'm barely speaking in the yin class, to
Me
be
too.
honest.
Yeah.
I'm barely speaking. So we have few words, and you want those, each to be as potent as they can be, to carry, that message of like, hey, you can let go. We're here to unwind. You have time. You have choice. Like, all of the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
qualities that are the yin qualities that can come even with just like one, swapping out one word. So yeah.
I think you're right. Definitely. When you start
Mm.
teaching a style where the words are fewer,
Mm.
you really start to notice the words that you do say. Yeah. Yeah. And you
Yeah.
notice, I mean, as a teacher, sometimes you notice the ones you say over and over that you're like, why do I keep saying
Right.
that? I don't even want to say that. Um, so sometimes we have these speaking habits,
Yeah.
right? Of things that we say. One that I say a lot that I'm trying to nip in the bud is just,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
we're just going to do this. And the reason
I
I say
know.
it, I know, is because I want it to feel less serious.
Mm-hmm,
Like I
mm-hmm.
don't want them to feel like there's all this pressure on them, but
Yeah.
that word doesn't need to be there. So, for those of you that are newer teachers, if you're wordsmithing and hearing yourself talk
Yeah.
sometimes and are like, I mean, even 20 years later, I'm still like, why do I say just? And when I write, I always start with so.
Mm. I do
So
that too.
everything's so, yeah. Yeah. I'll
Oh.
have my partner glance at things to edit. He'll be like, why did you start that sentence with so? I'm like, because that's how I would speak it. I would say it that way.
But when you
Uh,
make one of those little rules for yourself, I mean, I have done the same thing where I'm like, oh my God, why am I saying that? It's almost like it just comes like that, it comes more
yeah.
sometimes.
Yes. It either comes more or you're just now hyper aware of it. Like maybe you're just
Right.
like, oh, there it is again. There it is
There it is.
again.
And I
Yeah.
can't stop saying it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
tried to start pausing before I
Mm.
speak, and that helps. It's still not a work, it's a work in progress still, but that helps replace the just.
Mm.
It just an intentional breath.
Yeah.
And then I say what I need to say without, yeah.
Yes.
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 Yeah.
It would probably be more powerful without the just, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know. Sometimes it just comes out like that.
I remember when I took my therapeutic yin training, we all had to do teaching in front of as a group. We each had a little
Mm.
segment for a class. And then the facilitator, bless her, asked us if we wanted feedback on our
Mhm.
teaching, which is great in a teacher training to
Mhm.
not have to get it if you don't feel like you're in a position where you can take it. And then
Mm.
she would say, do you want it now or do you want me to email you? Which I also thought was great. And I was like, bring it. And she told me the problem for me was because I was already grillified, I
Yeah.
was already so aware of the fact that not everything's going to work for everybody and there might be
Mm.
different options, that I was already teaching in a way that included invitational language.
Mhm.
And so, but
Mhm.
then I was taking this trauma training. And so I was like over inviting, like I was
Mm.
like, I was using so many invitational words. And I remember her at one point being like, two invitational words is enough. Like you don't need to
Yeah.
like maybe perhaps when you're ready as you feel,
Yeah.
like it was just like it was getting wordy. It was getting word salad, you know?
Yeah.
Um and that's another thing. that I have noticed. And especially I would think for teachers, and I'm guessing that you would have a similar experience, that come from teaching an active form of yoga, just not talking so much is hard. Because you're so used to cueing every micro movement and every breath and then you're like, okay, so you're all in the shape. You found your spots. Now what do I do up here? Like it's tough at the beginning.
I think it is. We do spend a good amount of time in teacher training talking about like, now they're in there, and what do you say or not say? How do you get comfortable with like not saying? You're not just speaking for the sake of speaking, obviously. But yeah. The invitational language, I hear you with that. And I think that is one challenge for us as functional, teachers, all of us, is to like keep it invitational, make sure that they know their options, they have choices without just like overwhelming them with options and like,
yes,
maybe.
That's the key, right? With not overwhelming, not giving them all of the poses for their hip butt IT bandits.
How about like this? What about like
or you
this?
Could try that, or try a prop here, or because it can get a bit much.
Your butt.
Now it's been 15 minutes and we just got you into that pose. No, I tend to do kind of like 2 or 3 variations and mention one alternative pose, for injuries or whatever, and then I just see what's in front of me, because I might not need to do any more. And if somebody is struggling, then I'll go over to that person or give a third or fourth option. But it can be a whole thing. Now I was already like that in Iyengar too, because it's the same thing. It's like, I mean, they're trying to make you all look the same, but it's still very much that doesn't work for you. Put a block here, put a blanket here, try this, try that, so the whole buffet of options can be a bit intense. And so I'm wondering for you, because you're already a wordsmith, when you put that graphic out, that is hilarious to me, by the way, that you just said that. It was like, well, it was actually more of a, oh crap, I need to put something on Instagram. What could I put up,
Oh, well, I mean, I'm just being honest.
That's real life. I know all the yoga teachers listening to this are nodding right now going, yes, daily I have a, what the crap am I going to post on Instagram thought. And then it kind of took off. It started getting shared around, and then Yoga Journal knocked on your door and said, hey, can we?
Yeah, I did feel a little bit like it was sort of a wink from the universe, that maybe I should circle back around to writing a little bit, that maybe it was, so a few things have come up since then, but it was literally like, just on my phone, late evening, just like a download.
Tell you a funny story. So in the Yin Yoga network, and I cannot remember his name, which is unfortunate, somebody posted, and I'm going to butcher his question even, but basically he was asking like, what phrases, what words do you use in your Yin, classes? And I asked him what I ask a lot of people when they ask questions, because there are unfortunately, and I know that Paul says this is okay, but this is one of the few times I'm going to strongly disagree with my teacher. There are a lot of people out there teaching Yin who have no Yin training whatsoever. And so I always preface these questions with, did they go over that in your Yin training? Because if they don't have a Yin training and they're asking this question, I mean, the very next thing I'm going to say is you need to find a qualified Yin training. Like, you can't grab some books and a playlist and just show up at the studio and think that you're going to teach an exceptional Yin class. You might scrape by, but you're going to be missing. This is why there's so many people out there that will take a Yin class and be like, that was so different than what you do. And it's because it wasn't really, so anyway, I always ask that question, regardless of what the question is. Like, did they go over this in your Yin training? Because if they say, oh, I don't have any, then I'm going to say, okay, step 1, rewind, take a Yin training. Anyways, this gentleman had taken your training. And I said to him, what? I was like, she gave you like a graphic of like, I was like, here. And I posted it. I was like, here, how about some of these by the wonderful woman who trained you? And he laughed and he was like, I know. I just wanted more. It's like, I just want more. It's like,
Let me guess. I have a pretty good idea who
yeah,
it could be.
yeah, I just wanted more. I was like, well, how
Oh,
many ways can you say the same thing? But it turns out you can say the same thing a lot of different ways.
yes, you can. There was that other wonderful conversation just the other day in that same group about stretch and stress and
Yes.
that, and you know,
Oh,
that
the
was a big can of
splitting of the
worms.
hairs never
Yeah.
ends, does it? This is like, really? Yeah,
Yeah.
I think sometimes, um, again, and this is where I would encourage teachers to like to use your, and Paul said the same thing when I interviewed him, critical thinking. He was like,
Mm,
this is one thing that would change the world, critical thinking. Um, if you aren't questioning everything, especially, and I find that especially if somebody points it out, like, because then I find there's a lot of defensiveness, which of course is human.
mm.
But there's just so many people, for example, like with the whole, you shouldn't be saying stretch. And it's like, well, I
I
mean,
mean,
could stretch not be a synonym for reach? And if I'm doing this with my arm, am I not stretching my arm away from my body? Like, how far are we going to go into this, and also, this idea that I think a lot of maybe newer yin teachers have, that like muscle and fascia are separate. And in yin, we are just working with the fascia. And in other forms
right.
of yoga, it's like, we're not, that's not how it works, actually.
Separate it out, peeps.
Yes. So it's like, sure, you want to talk about tension and compression, do it.
Mm,
You want to use the word stretch, fine. But yeah, people get very attached, right, to
mm,
their words, and words mean so many different things to different people.
right.
If you ever want a perfect example of that, just look at the word God,
Mm,
right? Like, I've had people ask me, do you believe in God? And the first thing I say
mm,
is, well, I can't answer that unless I know how you're defining it.
mm,
Like, what's your definition of God? You tell me, and then I'll tell you if I believe that or not. Right?
mm.
Because otherwise, I mean, I think I've heard people have huge debates over something at the end to realize that actually they had the exact same opinion. They just were using different language.
Mm.
So I would love, if you don't mind, to maybe share some of those yin words.
Sure, I did pull it up here. Yeah, they're verbs. They're verbs because those are the movers. And when you have few words, that's a little tip from writing. You swap out the verb, it lets you say more with less. So,
Beautiful.
like soften, sense, unwind, release, attune to, settle, fall open,
Ooh,
rest
love
back,
that.
lean into, ease in or out, dissolve, integrate, witness, observe, meet, respond, illuminate, widen, immerse, shift, pause, notice, embrace, accept, absorb, loosen. Should I go on? Is
Yeah.
that good? um, invite, restore, recognize, fill, slide into, feel, free, infuse, greet, return, allow, calm, yield, listen, expand, unravel, deliver, be with, relax, connect to, migrate, float, inhabit,
Mm.
merge, fold, linger. It's always a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Melt, deliver, drop into, tune in, undo, unlock, unwrap, give. Phew.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Thanks.
Um,
I mean, I I just
it's
gathered them in one place.
Yeah, but I mean, there are so many there that I wouldn't have thought of. But then as
Mm.
soon as you said them, I was like, ooh, yes, like I feel that, you know? And then I
Yeah.
would imagine that the listeners would have heard other words than I
Mm.
did that really, like
Mm.
sat with them, Um, yeah, it's just so beautiful. So I think, you know, as teachers who've been teaching for a while, and then also as teacher trainers, there's always that fine line between I want to prepare you to succeed,
Mm.
and I want you to find your own path too. Um, and I just find that that's it's just such a fine line. I'm wondering how do you navigate that when you're training teachers?
I really just try to encourage them, like, to be themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I do that. I mean, and just to know, like, no matter what, you're not going to be for everyone. I just had
100%.
someone come to my class the other day who, was, um, said like, "Oh, I'm a yin teacher." And I was like, "Great, welcome." And this person was, a little bit visibly sort of restless during
Mm,
the class. And I was like, "Oh, okay." But I kind of, because she had said that she was a teacher, I was a little bit like, all right, I'm going to give her space. I didn't want to go like, over there too much I figured like she knows what she's doing. Do you know what I
mm-hmm.
mean? Because she's a yin teacher. And I was surprised afterwards. She had said to me, or not so directly to me, but we have our front desk calling up our introductory offer people to, see how they're finding everything. And she had given feedback that it wasn't spiritual enough for her. And I was like, well, okay.
Wow. Hey. Yeah.
I'm like, that's not my way, is not to kind of, beat you over the head with that. It's like an invitation to be present. It's not sort of overtly spiritual, if you will.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah,
was going
but
to
I
say,
was
and
like,
spiritual
okay,
is
well,
such a vague word, right?
yeah,
Because
I
I
don't know.
mean, what is totally spiritual to somebody is not going to be to them. It's like the word God, right? Like
Right?
what that means to one
Yeah.
person and someone else. I mean, like,
Yeah, but
yeah.
it is what it is, because that's I teach in the way that is authentic to me. I
Mm-hmm.
teach, I speak in the way that feels natural to me. Of course, I have done background work. I have thought about cues and what those are, but I try to just speak naturally in the moment. It's not like,
Yeah.
uh, written out or something. So yeah, we're not going to be for everybody. I think we, as Paul has always said, like, yoga is a big tent, and there are so many different kinds of people in the world. And one person is going to be excited and, um, you know, interested to hear about your fascia
Mm-hmm.
weaving through your, your whole body, and this, how we're waiting for a phase change in the water rich portion of the fascia, and this, release sensation that you're feeling. And another person wants to hear the Rumi quotes, and
Mm-hmm.
your job is to be authentically you, and then you will attract the people who resonate with that. So it's fine. I wasn't for her. But yeah, I'm not for everyone.
Yeah.
Nobody's for everyone.
I think that there's a whole bunch of new teachers right now that have just breathed a huge sigh of relief hearing that. Yeah.
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 I mean, you got to be yourself. You
Yeah.
got to be yourself.
And
Even
trust
in my,
that there's so many yoga teachers out there that they will find their person, right? They will
yes,
find the teacher that is like, aha. She will find the
absolutely.
teacher that is spiritual enough, air
The
quotes, whatever
one,
that means,
totally, exactly. In
Yeah.
my first teacher training with Jimmy Barkin, he showed us, do you know who Diamond Dallas Page is?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. The WWF, like,
I
whew,
do
okay.
because,
He's also a
okay,
yoga teacher.
yes, I was going to say I watched his documentary several years ago, but the reason that I know who he is, little peek behind the curtain of Nick's childhood, is my father was a wrestling fan. And so,
Okay.
and my parents were divorced, but one of the things that we did with my dad is like a bonding thing when we went over on weekends is, we'd all go down into the basement and he'd be on the couch and like one daughter each would kind of curl up and he'd put his arms around us and we'd put our heads on his chest and like we'd watch wrestling together. So yes, I
Aw.
know, I don't know a lot of the more current wrestlers because of course the childhood was a long time ago, but I definitely know. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, he is a yoga teacher now, right? And there is a documentary, it's on YouTube. It's called Enlighten Up. It was about this journalist guy whose friends are all like, oh my God, you have to start yoga. It's going to change your life. It transformed my life. And so he goes around and he practices with like all of these different teachers
I've
and
seen
styles.
that documentary. It's
Yes.
been a while though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the clips from there is him going to practice with Diamond Dallas Page. And it is like really, what's the word? Like, oh, chintzy. I don't know. It's
Mm-hmm.
the way that he's portrayed is like they're on this little strip and it's kind of like a Hooters commercial, and Diamond
Totally. I
Dallas
remember the
Page is
scene.
saying they're
Yeah.
like, make sure if you want to get a good shot, like get the girls when they're doing the cat cow from this angle, and you just exactly that. You're watching like, oh my God, oh my
You're
God, oh my
cringing. You're
God.
like,
Yes.
yes. Yeah.
And so Jimmy Barkin showed us this this clip, and then he showed us another clip, which was, I think, a viral video on YouTube or something. And it's about a guy who was in the military, and
Yes.
have you seen that one with the
Yes.
Coldplay song, and it makes you cry every time? And it's this life-changing transformation that this guy has. And then it's Diamond Dallas Page, who's
Yeah.
the one who speaks the language that this, military veteran, like, that touched him, that worked for him, that like there's an audience out there for all of us. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And that
Anyway.
it's for those who haven't seen it, and I have no idea if I'll be able to find it to include it in the show notes, but if I can, I will. Um, this gentleman goes from like not being able to stand without two
Mm,
canes to running.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the one.
Yes. So yeah, it's interesting because speaking on that nothing's for everybody wordsmithing thing, one of the reasons that for years this maybe only happened, maybe I'm like, time feels very weird over COVID. I'm like, hasn't it only been 1 year? No, it's been 4. Okay. Probably maybe 4 or 5 years ago is when I
Mm,
started including one poem in my yin classes. And before
well,
that, I never did. And the reason
mm,
I didn't is because all of the yoga classes that I went to, where the teacher, lovely teachers, lovely souls, lovely humans, would share a poem. The poem was always a little bit saccharine, a
mm.
little bit too rhymey, or a little bit too Pollyanna, kind of like, that's those for me. And, that just isn't, it just never felt grounded.
Mm,
And the poems never felt like they resonated with like my real life and my real human journey and
mm,
some of the mess that can go along with that and the shadow. Whereas I'm a more of a like, I'm a swim in the shadows girl. And so
mm.
for years I was always like, those yoga teachers that of course you pulled out a Rumi quote, of course you know um now I did have one teacher friend, a colleague, who when she brought out music or poetry, it was deep and it
Mm,
was shadowy. And that was
mm,
kind of the first example I had of like, oh yeah, this could be done in a different way. But of course I didn't stumble across poems that sparked that for me. And
mm,
then I found a poet, teacher, author, all around badass of feminine wisdom. Her name is Maya Luna, or is it Maya
mm,
Luna? Um, and I read a couple of her poems and was just like, whoa, like
mm,
now we're talking. So then I started using some of hers. And then it's almost like, they often say that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. It was like that with poetry for me. It's It's like once I found her and kind of carved out some of her poems to put in the magic iPhone to share during class, then there was a flood of like, I would just be on Facebook for like the whole 5 minutes, not in a group. And somebody would have posted a poem and I'd be like, whoa, that is epic. And I would, so then it became this collection. But it started with just that one author. And then I think I just attracted this kind of more deeper, soulful, stuff that's not afraid to speak to the shadow aspects of life,
Yeah.
And again, not every teacher is for everybody, because somebody might come to my class and hear that deep, dark cello music and that poem that I shared in the end and be like, Jesus, where's my unicorns and rainbows? Like, I need some light here. Like what, and don't get me wrong, my classes are not depressing, but I'm not afraid to dig deep to support those in the room that may be struggling. Because I do think in our wellness spaces that it can be a little bit too good vibes only. To the point where people that maybe are really struggling or suffering show up and feel like everybody else is doing great and I'm the only one who's suffering, So, but yeah, we all have our thing. And that actually just in the last 24 hours, well, by the time you hear this, it'll have been many more than 24 hours. in the Facebook group popped up where somebody asked for poems on kind of like, or nidras on, kind of fall and letting go and like fall seasons. And somebody in the comments said, why don't you just Google that? And I was like, oh my God, the hours I have spent on Google trying to find a poem that I liked I was like, oh, and I said, that takes way too long. I said, even with like super detailed keywords, you know, it's like, all you get is like old English poems or like really rhymey kind of like not even subtle rhyme schemes. Like we're talking like obvious rhymey stuff, and that's just not my jam. So it's like, no, I totally get why she's asking, because it takes time to find stuff like that.
It does.
And then, I do share one poem and then I use my languaging when I need to, but then there's plenty of room for space. And I've been to classes where the teacher has a theme and then uses a poem on that theme in a different one in every single pose. And for me, that just pulls me out of my body too much. I don't have that interoceptive if I'm listening to, because I'm into words so much that I'll be like listening so much that I'm not able to drop in.
Yeah, that was the other feedback which this teacher gave, which was that she just left us there. I was like, yep.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's very much, I remember Paul saying that in one of the trainings I took with him, Paul saying that like you choose your way as a teacher, because he's a just leave you there teacher. And then he didn't say who it was, but I have a feeling it might be. He's like, but then there's the teachers who are like, maybe perhaps in 4 breaths, you feel like you could go deeper, or you, they're like kind of gently coaching you the whole way. I tend to base that on when I'm doing a drop-in class on how many new people there are. Although that would not have worked with her because she was a teacher. So but I do, I'll ask people as they're laying down to put one hand on their belly if they're brand new to Yin. And then I may talk a little bit more at the beginning of class just about what is Yin, how it's different. Here's what you can expect before I move into the quietude. I'm happy to get to the quiet.
More sort of guidance, and just because I feel like our words are kind of giving a little bit more of a structure and a holding of the space. And so, I'm always in the beginning part of the class talking a little bit more, I check in a little bit more during maybe while they're in the pose, but as it goes on and I'm hoping that they're going deeper, I'm getting quieter
so that they can settle into themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I know that is one of the things that I find most, especially when either newer teachers or just newer to yin even
Mhm.
struggle with the most is like you said, like you're at the front of the room, they're all in there. Now what do I do? What do I say? You know, and there's such a discomfort with just sitting and holding your space
Mhm.
as the teacher. Um, what any thoughts on that? Like, especially in the beginning when you started moving from a style of like, we're talking a lot to like how did you ease yourself into that transition? Or did you find that difficult to move from I talky in my flow and then I
Yeah,
just don't?
for me, it wasn't that difficult. I don't think but I think that it's been so long. Also, I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, what I think is this, that like when you're teaching, it's the same thing as when you're practicing. You're sort of like energetically plugging in. It's all, but it's almost like instead of just your body, the room is your body. You know what
Yes.
I mean? And so you are feeling like, you can feel the energy. If they're like fidgeting around and they're sort of like not settling, that's when you might, drop in one
Nugget.
little word. Yeah, one little nugget for them. And so I feel like once somebody who's new, once they get over their nervousness and they're okay with like just being up there, if they can really just sort of ground and tune into what is happening in the space and in the room and respond to that, then it becomes easier to just embrace, like, we are here. They are there. They don't need me right this moment to like
Yeah.
bombard them with words.
Yes, because I hear so many teachers say, well, I mean, I talk or I guide because people are so uncomfortable with the silence. And I'm like,
Mm,
but the uncomfortable is part of the experience,
mm,
right? Like
mhm.
you're never going to be comfortable with silence unless you're first uncomfortable with silence. Like
Yep.
that journey from geez, I'm uncomfortable. Why isn't that teacher saying anymore? It's like, oh, okay, she gave me some words. I'll see if I can embody those. And like,
Mm,
huh, now I'm bored. And geez, like that journey is part of the yin experience. And
mhm.
as they go through that, they learn more and more how to be comfortable with less talking and guidance. But they're never going to get there if you are I don't want to use the word because I don't mean it in this way, but if you're babying them or hand holding them
Mhm.
overly much,
Yeah.
like, yes. And this is why, if there are new people in the room, I do explain here's how yin is different. We're going to have moments of still and quiet. When we do, here's what's going to happen with your brain. Bloop, 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 bloop. That's normal. The person next to you, despite the fact that they look all blissed out, also doing the thinking. So, like, let's just, like, let's just let that be known. We're all in this together, this loopy thought thing. Um, so I try to just normalize it and give some tools, and then I just stop, you know,
Mm,
because the discomfort is, I mean, imagine if, I actually, this sounds crazy, I know, but I remember learning to walk. I know that sounds bizarre, but I remember it because, and I asked my dad about it, so I know that this is accurate. I remember the sting on my hands when I would fall and the lino would hit my hand. And I remember
mm.
what the linoleum looked like. That's how I know it's real. Because I asked my dad, I was like, in that apartment, the lino, did it look like? Um, but imagine if when your baby was learning to walk and every time they were about to fall down, you rushed in to catch them.
Mm.
Like, how are they ever going to learn to stand on their own feet? Now, of course, you're not going to let them fall right onto the edge of the coffee table and crack their head open. I mean, if you have any say
Right.
about it, obviously, but like they have to fall on their butts a few times and on their hands before they go, oh, this is how I do this. And then even when they start walking, they're going to look sort of like a drunken sailor for a while until they kind of find their footing. And
Yeah.
to me, it feels the same way in a yin class. It's like, yes, people are going to be really uncomfortable in the beginning because we don't, I mean, some people do. Some people are wise and they take lots of still quiet time and they're out in nature a lot and they are kind of
Mm.
unplugged and maybe they're not on Instagram. those gurus. But like for the most of us, you know, we're rushing and, you know, and things are loud and things are busy. And so then when we all of a sudden, you know, move into the cocoon of a yin space, and all of a sudden it's like dim and quiet in there. There isn't all this external stimulus to like for us to pay attention to. Of course, that's hard, you know,
Yeah.
but it's also so worthwhile to let your students flounder just a little and find their own footing there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're doing there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So,
Beautiful. What advice would you give? Now, I know it's probably, this might be hard for you to answer because you are a wordsmith, but if a teacher's at the point where they're like, I think I want to start exploring my own words, like the words that I was trained with are kind of not quite it, but I haven't found my own. What kind of advice would you give that teacher that's at that place in their teaching where they're like, I don't want to parrot my teacher, but I'm also not quite there yet with like having my
yeah.
own tools in my tool belt?
I think you do want to sort of open your ears and listen for what cues other teachers are giving. I do think in the beginning, like, you know, that's important. Like, what are the ones that really land with you? Um, definitely it's a place to start. And I do think like there's nothing wrong with like sitting down and thinking about like, I feel like are just repeating, just relax, relax, relax. How, what else might you say that might be more concrete and specific, but still feels like you. And then I think you just have to, you know, work to expand your vocabulary, your cueing vocabulary, test it out. If it, you know, it might not feel natural to come off your tongue in the beginning, but if you get more comfortable with just sort of knowing what the different ways to say things are, then I think that eventually, you know, you find your way. You can find inspiration from so many places. I do also look at a lot of poetry, song lyrics, and I don't necessarily read always like an entire poem, but I might find a, you know, a phrasing or metaphor or something in there that would work its way into a class. So I think, you know, there's inspiration for language all around. There's nothing wrong with using a thesaurus or a dictionary.
I was going to say, I actually love a good thesaurus.
Yeah,
like
I love a good thesaurus. I mean, shout
I could
out
waste
to
a whole
whoever.
Saturday night doing that. Like,
Yeah, I know.
because, you know, you put in one word and then it gives you all these other words. And then you
Yes.
might be like taking those words and before you know it, ooh.
Yeah. Yeah. It
Yeah.
takes you down a rabbit hole. I love the online power thesaurus. Like a modern, I don't know what it's like, just seems to be somehow better than any other thesaurus.
Yes.
So, you know, there's nothing wrong with the thesaurus. There are many places that you can find words, and then you have to test them out, and then you have to get comfortable with them and figure out like what feels natural for you. And then it's not like you're going to take your little scrap of paper there. You have to then be in the moment, feeling what is happening and allow those words to come from within you.
Yes. How I came up with the word resonance instead of rebound actually happened at Land of the Medicine Buddha, because they have that big bell if you kind of go up near the forest. And I was like using the big wooden, you know, log to like hit the bell. And then I would just stop and I would just kind of feel that resonance of the bell on my skin, in my body. And that's when the aha hit me. I was like, this feels like when I come out of a yin pose. And then I was like, you know, at the beginning, it feels like that resonance. It's quite strong. And then by the end, it feels like a linger, you know, when it's like, I've taken my minute, you know, to do the rebound, which is what Paul calls it, but I've taken my minute to begin to, well, to notice, to feel like my familiar self. And, you know, kind of just before I'm about to move into something else, there's it's no longer really a resonance, as just a little bit of a linger. And so that's kind of how that language came to me, was,
Mm.
you know, from feeling something else in my body
Yep.
that made me go, oh, this feels like, yeah. And for example, I know I had a teacher once, and gosh, I wish I could say who it was, who had this whole thing, because I would love to give them credit, but I don't know who it is. This whole thing that they kind of said, you know, as you were settling into Shavasana, and most of it didn't resonate with me. But a simple phrase as the space between your muscles and your bones just
Mm.
hit me. And I was like, whoa, like when I can think about the space between my muscles and my bones, like there's just like a softening there
Mm-hmm.
that for me really hit. And so, you know, I began to use that tiny phrase, but
Mm-hmm.
in my own way, and with other
Yeah.
things around it that made more sense to me. So yeah, sometimes we do hear, you know, just a snippet from somebody, but then we're like, yeah, but the rest wasn't right. And that's where you get to really, you know,
Yeah. And from
wordsmith.
your body, I love that. That's exactly it. Like, get on your mat, do your practice, journal, write. How did
Yeah.
it feel? Those same, let the language bubble up.
Yeah. That is something that I feel like is really different from when I took my teacher training,
Mm.
and how they are now. You know, when I took my first teacher training, so I applied in 2003, for those of us that are keeping track of dates. I always have to stop and think about them. Like, what year was it? So I
Mm.
applied in 2003. We started in 2003. We finished in 2004. It was nice. It was like a year long thing. Um, which was great because it was really spread out, and it gave us all this time to really absorb the material. And then we even had mentorship included. So it was actually a 300-hour. Um, and I remember when I applied, though, in order to get into this teacher training, I had to have a home practice. You had to have a minimum, like I think 5 years of yoga experience was the minimum. You had to have a letter from a recommending teacher
Mm.
that said, I think that you would be a good candidate. And it wasn't based on like what asanas you could do. It was based on like what they knew of you as a person. So you had to do all of that before there was even the here's my credit card part. And
Mm.
now I feel like, you know, people just take 2 yoga classes and then they're doing a teacher training. And so, oh, and we had to have a home practice. And
Mm.
in our teacher training, we had to keep a home practice journal, and we had to hand it in.
Mm.
Now, you know, the journal wasn't like, you know, this wasn't the place where you wrote like your deepest, most, you
Yeah.
know, it wasn't that kind of a journal, but it was like, you know, I did this sequence. Here's how I felt. Next time I'd try. It's that kind of a journal, not so much
Yeah.
a like, you know, deep, soulful secrets journal. And you had to hand that in at the end of the semester, and you were marked on, not on what you did, but on the fact that you were practicing.
Right.
And I think that a lot of the younger generation of teachers just doesn't have a home practice, and they
Mm.
rely on going to the studio for their practice. And I'm going to just call that out, but also call you in, if that's you, if you're listening and you just went, I don't have a home practice, is that one of the reasons that you struggle with words is because you're not hearing your internal voice alone in your own home practice. If all
Mm.
of the asana that you're doing is guided by an external voice and their words, of course it's going to be a struggle to come up with your own words. So as uncomfortable as it makes people to hear, your home practice is what, in my opinion, grows you as a teacher.
Mm.
Because
Absolutely.
everything that you're teaching comes from your own experience. And I remember my very first teacher training, the teacher saying that, like, you know, you can't teach what you don't practice. And she
Mm.
meant physically, but she also meant mentally and emotionally. Like,
Mm.
you know, if you can't sit in your sorrow, how
Yes.
can you speak to sorrow? You
Yes.
know,
If
if you
you
can't,
don't, yeah,
yes, if you
sorry
can't
to interrupt you,
celebrate your bliss, how can you,
right?
teach that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't embody the yin vibe, how can you communicate it? So
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So there hopefully is some inspiration for teachers, but also like a little bit of a, truth bomb there. It's that, if you're never practicing on your own, you will always be using other people's words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's really good advice.
Yeah. And like you said, we all start with other people's words.
Yeah,
And then we sit
we
with
do.
them.
We
And
start
sometimes,
there and then, yeah.
and for me, and I don't know if this is similar for you, it's not like that stopped. It's not like I've
No,
stopped evaluating the words that I'm using. As we mentioned earlier, like I noticed
no.
that I say the word just, and I'm like, what is up with that? I didn't notice that for years. It
Yeah.
wasn't until my awareness became honed so much with verbiage and being so intentional with my words that I was like, huh. And I think a great tip can be is to just record yourself while you're
Mm.
teaching. Like even just on your iPhone, like the audio, and then listen back to it and be like, oh, is that really what I meant there? Or is that the best word for that? Or is that, you know, it can be hard, it can be difficult to do, but it
Yeah,
can
you might
be.
be surprised.
Yes, definitely. Well, that's how I found out about just. I was listening back to myself going, well, how many times have you said that word in this hour-long practice, So how do you continue now with your wordsmithing? Does it still come from just your practice, and like do you write little notes to yourself afterwards?
No, I
No.
don't.
No, they
I
just
just
whatever happens lands and
I
you
am
keep it.
like I am like a walk in and teach kind of a person.
Oh, I
And
meant in your own
what
practice.
comes out, what comes out. Oh, in my own
Yeah,
practice. Yeah,
yes, yeah.
I mean, I journal. I do journal. I I I don't always write after every single, time that I sit or that I do a practice, but I do write.
If something pops
Um,
up.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think I do try to make it like my teaching part of my practice. Do you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
this thing of being present and trying to open myself as sort of a conduit for what needs to come out, or what I am speaking from my own body, from my own experience. But um yeah, I honestly, I don't plan or overthink. I just, at
Yeah.
this point, I just go in and I just let it come out.
I'm the same. I'm the same.
Mm,
Um, I never, unless it's a workshop, like a themed workshop,
yes,
I never have like a predetermined sequence.
exactly. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, me too.
I also check in with the students when I'm at the beginning too, to just see like where is
Mm,
everybody at, so
mm,
they all share like a word or a phrase, and it could be hamstrings or it could be grief or whatever. And if
mm,
they don't want to share, there's a hand signal to let me know they don't want to share. Um, and that's how I create my class,
yeah.
based on what they say, but also what I witness
Mm,
um, appearing in the room. There are times that I might have a quote in my phone or a poem pinned as like, this is the one I'll use this week. And then based on what they're all sharing, I'm like, that is not the one we're using this week. We're going to use this one instead because
yeah.
this is what the people need in this moment. Now, I would not have done that as a new teacher because I'm way too recovering A type and also anxious personality type to just like show up and wing it.
Mm,
Which is what I would have thought. I would have looked at me now and thought that I'm just showing up and winging it. And I'm not winging it at all. It's based on years of experience.
years of experience. Yeah.
Yes, it's flexible, but I'm not
Mm,
winging it. I'm not just like,
yeah.
it's like it
No.
is very intentional. It's just the intentionality is created on the spot as opposed to
Yes.
like in advance. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I do think ultimately allows a teacher or a facilitator to meet the students, more fully.
Yeah. to me, it shifted from, I mean, I always started to teach yoga because I wanted to be of service,
Mm.
and the service I wanted to be in this way with yoga.
Mhm.
But when I let go of my sort of predetermined lesson plans is when I think I really stepped into that role of, can I be of service to whatever's coming up today in this room, in this moment with these people?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
beautiful. So, how has your how has your teaching shifted from, or has it, over COVID times? Because, right?
Well, I mean, we all did went online and did that whole thing. And thankfully, I'm off that. That was not my favorite period. Of course, we all, I think it is such a weird time thing. It feels like long ago now, and almost like I can't believe that it happened.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think we taught for like a year without any props because everyone was like, "Oh, you have to clean the props," and um, not we're kind of sort of back to normal here in Finland.
For those of you who can't see, she just did air quotes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, just sort of back to
Whatever
normal. I
normal
mean,
is. Yeah.
whatever normal is, yeah, but so there wasn't such a huge shift for me, like that
Yeah.
lasted.
Did you take your
Thankfully.
teacher training online as well? And then now you've moved that back to in
No, I
person?
didn't. I did in person the whole time because I have small groups and, we were apart and
Right.
masked up and yeah.
And every part of the world had such a different
Mm,
way of handling, and in Canada, you're originally American, so you'll understand. Our version of your states is provinces, for those of you Americans listening. And although we have much fewer of them and they are much larger, so fewer provinces, larger land. But that was under provincial domain, just like in the States, it was state to state. And so what we were doing where I live was like totally different than the province right next to me.
mm,
There was a couple provinces. So I live in British Columbia and also Quebec, that were like ridiculous, actually, with the standards and the things that they put in. That's a rant for a whole other time. But we were closed 5 times completely.
oh,
Whereas most, and that's because in the province I live in, yoga is considered fitness, not
mm,
wellness.
mm,
If we were wellness, we would have been closed that one time that the whole world shut down. And then they would have put in some principles and policies about sprays and masks and distancing,
mm,
and life would have moved on, like it did with massage therapists and
mm,
acupuncturists. But because we were deemed fitness, they kept shutting us down. And I do understand that there is a difference between like the yoga that I teach, which is very therapeutic, very gentle, and a lot of yin. And sometimes even in my movement-based classes, we don't even
mm.
stand up. And so there's a big difference between that and a hot yoga class. And I can understand how to some, bureaucrat in the government who doesn't even do yoga, like
Right,
they can't rectify how they would make both of those have the same, you know.
right.
But because the restrictions repeated so many times, and then when we were open, the rules changed like as often as you change your underwear. Like
Mm,
literally every time I would go to the studio, I'd be like, okay, so what's the distancing now? Are we masking to our mats and then able to take them off? Are we wearing them a whole time? Are we not wearing them? Is there a passport in place? Is there not a vaccine? Like it was it was awful. But one of the things that it really gave me was the ability to even more so just kind of show up and be like, all right, what are we dealing with today?
right.
Um, but because we were so up and down, and I actually always wanted to do some online classes,
Mm,
just because I'm from Alberta. and I now live in BC, and I had a student base there. So I was actually one of the few yoga teachers planning to do a Zoom class even before COVID happened. And then I was just like, oh, I guess we'll start that right now. But I've kept my training online,
Okay.
my yin training. And I am just now at the point where I'm like, maybe at some point. So I do fall and spring online. I keep the group small though, because like you, I like it to be a small group. I want to see everyone's face. I want to see the light in their eyes when they understand. I want to see if they're overwhelmed. I want to be able to get to everyone's questions, So I don't want it to ever be this, here's a bunch of pre-recorded content. You don't get to ask me questions. I mean, not for a certificate program. If someone was auditing the course, fine. But, so I'm at the point now where I'm like, I don't think I'd want to do one in person locally because we're quite small. It's a small city. I could, but I'm almost at that point now where I'm like, maybe I'll start putting like a little teacher training in Mexico on the vision board. Like maybe that needs to happen once in the winter, where it's like we all go somewhere. Because for me, I think that's the best way to do an intensive, is if you are leaving life, and like we did when you go to LMB, where it's like, I don't have to do laundry, I don't have to cook.
It is the best.
I just have to like focus on my studies and rest and self-care. And that's it. Yeah.
If I had unlimited funds and unlimited possibility, it's basically all I would do.
Right? Yes.
Yeah.
I know if I had the unlimited funds, which, the coffers are still filling due to COVID times. I said that to Paul once. I'd be at every damn thing you offered if I, it's like every year I'd be like, how many things are you doing? I'll do all of them, but I have to pick and choose.
Yeah.
And how was it to see Paul and Susie and maybe some other familiar faces again after?
Oh, it was amazing. It was so good.
Yeah.
So just so inspiring. And there is nobody who can break it down like Paul, while, just like paring it down to the essentials in language that you can completely understand. And yet the dimension, like the poetic dimension and the beauty and the mystery and it's so wonderful. So wonderful. It was a Gita training. So
that's the one I would do. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It was like, just my heart was like really good.
Yeah, he really does. Him and Susie really do have this gift of being incredibly soulful and wise, and keeping it simple, and then cracking a really good joke, like all at the same time. Like it's like, how does this exist all in one person? It
is. If you know, it's the best. It's the best. So hopefully get some more opportunities in the future.
Yeah, I hope to as well. Well, this might be a good time to slowly start to wrap things up. So you are doing teacher trainings. They're in person.
I am doing teacher trainings. They are in person. During COVID, I personally purchased probably like 3 or 4 online courses that I've never completed, because it's hard to do, for me at least personally, to do online. So I'm only in person. But I have my 2 studios here in Latvia, and I teach like 5 or 6 days a week here.
And you have family as well. You got a little one, so you got family life going on too.
Yeah. So
yeah, I'm with you on the online learning thing. I think that unfortunately a lot of teachers just took their content and threw it online without understanding that we learn differently online. Like you can't do an 8-hour straight through on a Zoom online and expect that by hour 4 anyone remembers anything you're saying. Like it just, and I did do that. I was at the time teaching for a yoga therapy college, and that's one of the reasons I kind of stopped, is that they took the modules and just put them online exactly as they are in person. And I'm like, by hour 4, I mean, you could just see people glaze over. Like it was just like they're no longer here. It's not the same as in person. It has to be done differently for sure. And I noticed myself, Because I did the same. I took a few courses, not that many. I tried to,
Yeah.
I did a couple like yoga stuff, but then I mostly was just investing more in the business side. Those were the things that I took. And yeah, I mean, I have ADD already. So like attention is not, staying focused is already difficult for me without like moving and fidgeting. And so like definitely if it's a Zoom thing, it's got to be in like small doses because that's as
Yeah.
long as I'm able to really absorb the information. Yeah.
Mm.
Beautiful. Well, my friend, I have some little questions that I like to ask at the very end.
Okay.
And some of these are light and some of them
Okay.
are a little more soulful. First one is coffee or tea?
Coffee. You cannot live in Finland and not drink coffee.
Now, is that because they have amazing coffee or because it gets dark at like
No, the
2
coffee
p.m.?
is horrible. The coffee is horrible here. It's like, no, it's because it's just dark. It's cold. I
Mhm.
mean, and everywhere you go, people are offering you coffee. Like when you go to someone's house, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
very rare for people not to drink coffee here.
I mean, in Canada here, it'll at some point it'll start getting dark at 4 p.m. And I know you
Mm,
have it way worse than that, being even more north. And so yeah, I can't imagine an autumn winter season without coffee. It's like, how's that a
yeah,
thing? In the spring,
definitely.
summer, I can. Yeah. Favorite ice cream flavor?
Oh, vanilla.
I love that. I love that you said vanilla. I'll often like I have to do non-dairy stuff now, but I'll often scan and if everything's a bit too colorful
Mm.
and weird, I'll go for the good classic vanilla. Yeah. One thing people often get wrong about me.
Um, one
This
thing
one?
that people often get wrong about me,
Yeah.
uh, people tend to think that I am just a happy-go-lucky person because especially because I live here and I present as very cheerful and American.
Hmm. Interesting.
So they don't know that I am a person of depth.
Yes. That there's shadows in here too, y'all.
Yeah.
Do you have a pop culture vice, like a show that you binge or a book series or a movie or something that just like
Oh, all of them.
all of them? Awesome. Ah,
I'm actually like a huge Alone fan, which they mostly film in Canada. I'm like massive fan of Alone.
I don't ever watch it current time because we don't have like cable or TV or whatever,
Yeah.
but with our library card we can get
Yes.
stuff and that I started binging them. And actually it was because the first one was because it was the very first one was on Vancouver Island. It's like that's where I live.
Yeah.
What the heck?
Yeah.
How did I not know
Yeah.
about this? So yeah, I love that show. And now I realize how many survival skills I want to get under my belt. I'm like,
Oh, wow.
especially when they're walking on Vancouver Island and they're just picking seaweed up and they know what it is and it's edible. I'm like, I go to the
Yeah.
beach every day. How do I not know this? Like, I need to learn about the mushrooms and the berries and the seaweed and all the things. Yes. It's inspired a whole new set of hobbies that I want to learn. Yes, that's a good show. If
It's a
you
really good
yeah.
show.
And it's so interesting too to watch people. I found that when I watch it, it's always the what my partner and I will call the tough talker, dirty walkers, like the people that
Mhm.
talk tough, like I'm going to be the last one, are usually the first ones out.
Yeah.
And it's the
Yeah.
people where you're looking at them at the beginning going, I don't know if you're going to make it. And they totally do.
Mm.
So surprising. When I'm not practicing yoga, I am.
At this time of year, I am hunting for mushrooms.
So you could teach me some mushroom wisdom. Uh, one weird fact about you, other than the fact that you watch alone.
um, One weird fact about me, I actually moved twice to Finland for love with different people.
What? I did not know that.
Yes.
That's amazing.
But many years apart. And
You were obviously meant to be in Finland.
I feel like I have some kind of karmic connections. Yes.
There we go. That's amazing. What the world needs now is
to unplug.
Good one. Right after you finish listening to this episode.
Yeah.
One thing I wish people knew about Yin Yoga.
I wish that they knew that it's not just about feeling good and enjoying. I mean, I think that's hopefully a part of it, but like you said, sometimes it's not that comfortable.
Yeah. It can be a bit, the word I often use is unearthing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be with yourself, and sometimes that's not easy.
Yeah. And sometimes it is, not to scare everybody, but there are definitely practices where I'm like, really, I need to look at that, and then there's other practices where I'm just in like,
right.
yin yoga gasms the whole time. It's just like, oh, yes.
Yeah.
Is there anything that I forgot to ask you that you'd like to add?
Not I can think of, no.
Awesome. Well, we'll say our proper goodbyes when I stop recording. But for those of you listening, bye for now.
Bye.